Hello everyone, welcome to this JavaScript video. In this video, we're going to be creating two functions today. The first function is going to be printing fizzbuzz from A to B, and the second function is going to be us counting vowels from a word, and let's get started. So to start off, we have this function called fizzbuzz, which we are going to start from a lower value of A, and then we're going to count towards B. And then we have the second function, which is going to count the number of vowels in a word, assuming that our vowels are A, E, I, O, U, all lowercase. And in this code right here, I have it separated as follows. In this section of my code, I'm going to be writing all the functions that I'm going to create. And then in this section of our code, we're going to be calling our functions that we created ourselves, much like how we would call like the prompt function or the console.log method in our code throughout how we have been coding JavaScript so far. Okay. If you don't know what a function is a little smaller version of programs that we've been writing so far, just that they're contained in much like a variable where we label like a container which stores data, but in this case it's a container for a set of code that we want to run. And if we find ourselves repeating certain blocks or certain lines of code over and over again, it's nicer for us to put that all inside a function that we can call, and we can give them our own label. To do so in JavaScript, we're going to use a keyword called function, and much like a variable where we write a let statement, we're going to write a name for our function. In this scenario, we're going to call it fizzbuzz, and then this function is going to take two values. I'm going to say it's going to take a start and an end value. So what we've done so far is that in this function, we're telling this function called fizzbuzz that you're going to get a value called start and value called end. We have no idea what those values are, so we are just creating placeholders for those two values that this function is going to get separated by commas. Okay, and then we're going to be writing the following code. So since we know that we're going to start from this value called start, we're going to say that while start is less than end, we're going to be repeating some of our logical structures for us to output fizzbuzz and fizzbuzz. So for example, if we were to say that start modulus 3 is equal to 0, and start is modulus of 5 is equal to 0, that means it is a multiple of both of the numbers. We have to do console.log fizzbuzz. Otherwise, we want to say that if start is just a multiple of 3, we're going to output, we're getting quotation marks here, we're going to do console.log fizz. And then else if, we're going to say that if start has a modulus of 5 is equal to 0. Then we're going to do console.log buzz. And lastly, if all of our if statements are false, as in our conditions are false, we're going to say that console.log the start value. And as we loop within this iteration, we're going to say that start is going up by 1. Now, I have created the function, and I'm calling it within our main version of our program. I'm going to turn this off to show you how this works. So we're going to run this code. And as you can see, we started from 12. So 12 is a multiple of 3 right away, but not multiple of 5. So it goes to fizz. And it's going to go all the way up to 100. Sorry, all the way up to 99 because I didn't include it. Let me make that edit here. We're going to include that value. And we're going to go all the way up to our 100, and we end up getting fizzbuzz. And one thing nice about this program is that we don't need to now rely on prompts, but rather input the values that we want to test our function with. So if I wanted to say that I want to try this from 1 to 20, now I can change these input values where start is going to hold the value 1 and end is going to hold the value 20. And if I run this code again, now we're going to get this type of behavior where instead of prompting and interacting with their program through the console, but rather we get to interact with their functions that we wrote inside the function, the code itself. This is really nice because now if you are writing a gigantic piece of code, it is nice to segment and separate a lot of your different code areas into functions so that you can test portions of your program rather than testing a large subsection of your code. So here, this was our example of creating a FizzBuzz problem inside a function. And one thing to note is that when we create a function, we want to use a keyword function, and you write a name that you want to call it, much like a variable. And within the brackets, if you need depending on how many values you need for that function, you're going to outline them and create like a variable name for them so that you can use them inside the function without knowing them. Just having an assumption of what those values would be, you're able to write instructions on how we're going to use those variables that we're given. And until we're given them, we have no idea what it is, and the code actually doesn't run until it's called upon. So if I were to turn line number 27 off and run this code, there's going to be no execution because we have only defined a function. Right now in our main.js program, we are just saying that this function exists and you can call upon it only if you provide a start value and an end value, and the program kind of assumes that the start value is going to be less than end. So for example, in this situation here, if I did 100 and comma 20, nothing occurs because there was no console.log to be used. And this is an example of a function that has its own console.log so that it will do its own output as long as our start value is less than our end value. So we're going to try a 1020 again, and it's going to output these values. And this is sometimes nicer than writing a bunch of prompt statements, as you can just create a function and test it with your own values that you want to use rather than always running it and entering the values here in this kind of scenario. We're also now going to create another function called a vowel counter. And what we're going to try to do is the following. We want to say that we want to create a variable. So say let answer is equal to vowel count of us doing hello world. And maybe another section of our code being like our user input is equal to prompt enter a word. And then we can say that let results 2 be the result of running this vowel count function on this variable called user input. Now we're going to see how to code this type of behavior in our custom functions as well. So let's go. To create a function, we want to use the keyword function. In this situation here, since I'm using this function called vowel count, I want to create that in my program. Because let's say, for example, I comment this out, our function vowel underscore count doesn't exist in our code. We're going to get a compile error because we're going to get vowel underscore count is not defined. So we want to create a function called vowel count. And then this one only takes in a single argument. I don't know what it is. We're going to call it word. And then we're going to start our count like that. Currently, we don't know what the word is, but we are representing any value, any singular value that we can get when we provide a value to this function. We're going to call it as a variable called word. And to start off with, we're going to say the following. We're going to say that we have let I is equal to 0, as in we're going to be indexing this string called word. Our stopping point is going to be word.length. And then our while loop is going to be structured as follows. Let me just bring this to the top. We're going to say while I is less than our stopping point, we get to analyze the current character. So we can say let current be word.at_i. And we need to make sure that our I is increasing by 1, like so, by the end. And then we can say that if current is equal to A, or current is equal to A, then we can have a let counter, which is equal to 0, increase that counter by 1, like so, like that. And then now we get to continuously copy this code for A, E, I, O, U. Like that, we can now just convert that to an E. And then we can write I. We can write O. capital O. And then lastly, we can write U. So what we're doing right now, as this variable called current is going to go through the individual characters in this given word that we don't know. We only know them when we call our function when provide an actual value for that variable, but we're going to assume that it is a string, and we're going to act like that word has value, and we wrote logic. If that word had a string value, how can we use it to calculate the number of counters it has? Now, right now, this function has no idea or no way to provide what the value counter was. What we could do is say that, well, console.log counter, we can output that value, but that doesn't really say that this function has generated that value. Rather, it just puts it to the console. So to have our own functions be able to generate and return calculations, we write a return statement. So after our while loop is over, we can return the value of counters to say that, hey, the codes within my function has completed, and this is my calculation value or variable that I've set. So let's see how this portion works. Oh, sorry, it should be double equal signs here. See, kids, I make mistakes too. All right, let's run this again. So right now we have buzz. Our first portion of our code from 10 to 20 fizzbuzz is working properly. And here where it says enter a word, right? So enter a word, and we get to be like, say like goodbye. And nothing happens because here there was no console.log. There was no console.log happening within this function, and there is no console.logs happening in line 54, 55, and 56. Okay, so if we wanted to see the answers of goodbye and our answer, we can do console.log answer, and then we can do console.log result. And let's see what that gets outputted in our program. We did our fizzbuzz of 10 to 20. We're going to write goodbye for our input, and it's 3. Hello world had E, O, and O as a vowel, so that's the answer of 3. And result 2, which is goodbye, had the O and the O and the E counted as our vowels in our input. Right, so this was a quick introduction to how to create functions in JavaScript. I really hope that you read the chapter on JavaScript, which I have linked in the descriptions below. Anyways, I'll see you next time, and just remember, stay classy.